Welcome to SSE Essentials, a podcast series exploring entries in the newly released Encyclopedia of the Social and Solidarity Economy, or SSE. The Encyclopedia is your comprehensive guide to the SSE, a concept recognized globally for its potential for inclusive and sustainable economic and social development. Published by Edward Elgar, the SSE Encyclopedia is a collective work of the United Nations Interagency Task Force on SSE, or UNTF-SSE. For today's episode, we have invited Professor Christina Clamp, Southern New Hampshire University, the US, who contributed to the SSE Encyclopedia an entry on the education sector together with her colleague. Professor Clamp, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And I'm sorry I can't have Colleen Tapley with us, who co-authored the section on education sector with me, but she's actually traveling and learning more about how other people are handling their challenges around education. So I'll have to just speak for the two of us today.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can start with your brief introduction about yourself.
So my introduction probably should, in terms of explaining how I came to be in higher education, grows out of my interest in how we could create alternatives for people in educational settings. I went to a Quaker college that is now part of Long Island University as their global college. And I was concerned about the ways in which I felt my own experience of education had not met my needs, and then had a chance to study in the American South with a civil rights organization where we were still facing the challenges of what's called Jim Crow in the United States, or a highly segregated society that clearly worked against Black and brown people. And so my interest starts there. And I had a professor, Morris Mitchell, who was a big proponent of cooperatives. And so my background is one of essentially continuing on that path around how to build stronger democracy, stronger civil engagement at the grassroots level, and the role of cooperatives.
You're a sociologist, an expert on cooperatives, and you are also very active in various movements, especially cooperative movements. With this background, why did you become interested in the SSE or SSE movement?
Yeah, so starting with that experience as an undergraduate in college, I saw the ways in which cooperatives have been used around the world. I spent 6 months in India, where I saw that there was a strong emphasis in development work around engaging local residents in exercises around problem solving, and the importance of cooperatives as a part of that. I had a chance to meet with a number of people who had been followers of Gandhi's work, looking at things like people's courts, agricultural cooperatives, water cooperatives. And so that really cemented for me the ways in which this was a model that worked at the grassroots level to improve people's lives, to catalyze community wealth. And then I spent a year and a half in Central America, where again, I was seeing that cooperatives were often a very successful way to bring people together. I spent time in Costa Rica and Guatemala, and Costa Rica had a much stronger civil society engagement with community development. And so that's really the starting point for me. I then came back to the United States and became early involved with what has become a much stronger movement now around the development of worker cooperatives. And that was the focus of my graduate work, where I looked at the Mondragon cooperatives and the role of management in those cooperatives.
SSE community is often criticized because they are preaching to the choir or those already converted. We have to explain SSE to those non-converted or outside SSE community. So how do you think we have to explain SSE to those non-converted or those outside SSE community?
I think I would start by saying that when we think about where there are failings in our society around economic and social activities, the conventional way to think of it is government needs to fix this, and the government will either create its own policies and programs, or it provides support to nonprofits to do this. I think the example of the Italian social cooperatives is a good example of that. So when I think about how to do this in a way that makes sense, I say, what are the ways that community people can come together and address things that they can address themselves, and not to think in terms of what we lack, but what is it that we have of resources that we can build upon. So that may be using nonprofits, it may be using a civic association, it may be working with local cooperatives, and it can certainly be working with government as well. It's about creating those networks, creating those partnerships.
You wrote an entry entitled Education Sector for the encyclopedia. Could you explain a little bit about your entry and what did you want to share with readers through your entry?
Well, I have to say, Chong, I wish I had had at least another 5 pages to work with. This was one of the more challenging pieces of writing because Colleen and I had split up the work between, one of us would look at higher education and the other would look at primary education. And I had wanted to include also the non-formal sector of education because of my experience and background in development. But we focused on higher education and primary school education, primary and secondary, I should say. So with the education sector, it really is an area where we're looking to create innovative approaches, solutions to the limitations or failures of the public school systems. Oftentimes, the approach in solidarity and social economy work is how can we create resources that support those transformative activities in ways that they're not met by the public schools or by institutions of higher education. You know, higher education's done a great job looking at how you do business development in the world and how to do this in a globalized fashion in the last probably 40 years. What is lacking is has been the resources for how to think about alternatives. I did a lot of capacity building for credit unions, and those credit unions often had to rely on conventional business education. And so managers then have to learn on the job. And so it's the social and solidarity economy through its institutions that is where we have to turn to create that capacity to how to work differently, whether it's working in an institution where you're accountable to community members who are your members of the credit union, or how to create an alternative ownership structure where the workers are the owners of the business. So in that research, we look at where there are programs of education that currently support that. I wish there were more. Specifically, I was really intrigued by Team Academy, which is a model that is working across a number of countries now and is linked to incubator sites, including one in Seoul, one in Berlin, and then others in Spain, and has recently come to include Costa Rica in their network. So the entry talks about that work. Also about how in Brazil, the government has supported creating capacity building for entrepreneurship within the social and solidarity economy through 2 different initiatives there. And in Korea, there's a program that's being supported across over 20 universities now that looks at social economy leadership and what's called excuse me. So these are examples that we were able to highlight in the entry. In terms of primary school education, the examples that I was able to find there that were especially intriguing, and I have to say Colleen did a great job on this part. She actually was able to speak with some of the people involved in this work directly. She looked at a program that is called Taking Making into Challenging Contexts, a toolkit. And this is for design thinking in STEM education and is being used throughout East Africa. And it's really intended for problem solving skills to address local needs. So this is, I think, a perfect example of what we're talking about in terms of the connection between the solidarity social economy and education. Another one is the Association for Sarva Seva Farms, and this grows out of Gandhi's philosophy around economic self-help. They've done extensive work to improve access and opportunities for rural education and developed a model called weekend schools because they recognize that children are often left unsupervised on weekends because their parents have to work. And lastly, an area that we looked at was the school cooperatives in Germany and in the Basque region. The ones in the Basque region I'm familiar with because of my long-term relationship with colleagues with the cooperatives in the Basque region. And the Ikastolas really, as they're referred to in Basque, are schools that are cooperatives where parents are involved, the students are involved in active learning. And part of their goal was really to revive Basque culture and language after the end of the Franco period in Spain.
Excellent, Chris. I'm already feeling very sorry to listen to your summary. Summary is that long, and it should have been, one book rather than one entry. Thank you very much.
That's all for today's episode of SSE Essentials. The Encyclopedia of the Social and Solidarity Economy is available online for free. It is also for sale in hard copy for your libraries or bookshops. Check the links in the podcast description to get your own copy. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for the next episode of SSE Essentials.